Is it really our 10th season?
I think it's our ninth.
If y'all started in 2016,
so this is 9.
Yeah, it's 9.
16?
We started in 16?
Yeah, if 16 was your first season, then it's 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22,
right.
23, 24, 25.
This is 10.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, is it like a 16 with 0 kind of thing? Or 16 is 1 kind of thing?
16 is 1.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that true? Because I've been marking everything as season 8, I think.
Season 8? How did you get 8?
Oh, no, for last year.
It's not like the show's. The show is turning 9 years old. Yes.
Right.
But
we're
this is
starting
the
10th season. So 9 years, 1 day.
You don't call it. I mean, yeah, you don't call a 9-year-old kid in his 10th season.
The first season's season 0.
This is like that famous Arsenal age argument where like two people on Arsenal Twitter were just debating about whether someone was like 23 or 22, and they're like, yeah, but he's like basically 23, and they're like, no, he's still 22. That's not how it works. Yeah. It's like, well, he has the vibes of a 23 year old.
I mean, if
he's in his 23rd year of life, that's not how it works.
Now that I've thought it over, I think we should start saying, oh, this is my son Kenny. He's in his 10th season. Hasn't been canceled yet.
Get a contract renewal up at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Well, it's episode 288 of View from 202, and what we now realize is our 10th season of this show.
We
crazy.
think, fact checkers, please send us an email to
detailed Google sheet
from 202.com. You could use our contact form on View.
No, I went rogue and went ahead and called it. I mean, I'm sorry to have caused so much friction and confusion, but
yeah,
we have to check our fandom wiki page to see what they're saying on there.
Yeah, we really dropped the ball in terms of cultivating parasocial relationships, although that kind of does intimidate me, that you end up building up a little bit of expectations.
I mean, our Patreon subscribers know us very well.
Peaches, you could really put that together with your Twitch streaming.
That's true. Yeah, where's our wiki, Peaches? The club itself barely has its Wikipedias updated anymore. I mean, we can't ask for too much. There was a point where like each Red Bull season Wikipedia page was pretty detailed, but I think it's fallen off. Although Metro Fanatic's still chugging away, as far as I know.
Wasn't it last episode when one of us was trying to pull something up on like the current season wiki page and it just like hasn't been built out yet?
Yeah, I mean, there's someone posting.
We used to have some soldiers out there in this fan base.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 1 or 2 people posting links to the subreddit still, I think. So,
I mean, has anyone even bothered tried to make a Wikipedia box like graphic of all the different competitions? Like the Wikipedia pages for band members where it has like the graphic of like all,
the charts,
who was in the band at a different time, like that, but for the 2025 MLS season and how many different competitions are going. It was too complex to figure out, and everyone on Wikipedia said forget it.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we're here for our 10th season of talking about the Red Bulls, as crazy as that is. This is our preseason episode, I guess. The season is starting on Saturday. The preseason, I guess, is over. It's Wednesday, and all of our games at the Coachella Invitational have already happened. We've got one on the background here as we're recording, just for ambiance's purposes. And here we are, ready to evaluate and think about a new Red Bulls season.
I know we're going to like kind of put more of the like soccer prognostication kind of stuff and all that maybe on the back end or later end of the episode, but I do want to say like kind of what you were just saying, Brit, about like, oh, preseason is over all of a sudden. Like I guess a couple weeks ago in our episode we were kind of waxing nostalgic about like the old mobile mini Sun Cup and the old preseason games that used to be able to watch streaming or whatnot, and now and saying that like nowadays like it feels weaker to just be so kind of tentative about broadcasting these games. But now, having watched some of the game last weekend, and we have some games playing up on the screen right now as we're recording from the Coachella Invitational. These are not real games. These are not real preseason games. I mean, and I don't mean that in terms of like, obviously within an MLS context, yes, these are what passed for preseason. But I don't know. I was just thinking, especially like when Jurgen Klopp was visiting the camp or whatever a few weeks ago, I was just thinking like, man, if he's actually serious about like raising the level and whatever his job is here, he should be kind of embarrassed that this club he oversees that's backed by millions, if not billions of dollars, is doing preseason just scrimmages against other MLS teams in parks. Like, it's not all other MLS teams, but there's a few other MLS teams who do like go to foreign countries and pay to play, against, maybe it's reserve teams or just like, the bench players for actual teams. And like, I've seen teams like going to Mexico, Spain, whatnot, warm weather places during preseason. Why, if Red Bulls are supposedly one of the richer teams in MLS, why are we doing these, chintzy little MLS scrimmage tournaments?
Not only that, but Emirates Cup winner, Red Bull New York.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there
Which
used to
we
be the
did
La
take
Manga,
off,
the
yeah.
La Manga Cup
Right.
or whatever that, used to be a tournament, back in, I guess, 90s, 2000s, where it was like all the other winter league leagues, clubs would show up like Russia, Sweden, US
Norway.
or whatever. Yeah, Norway. And like, but yeah, even that is, much higher level and standard than these games that are done. I guess they've spruced up the Coachella grounds a little bit since they first started doing this a few years ago when I was doing OAM. Because when I was doing OAM and following this stuff a little more closely, it looked really like bare bones facilities. And it's like, I don't know, like, yeah, of course they're, it is imperative on the league to make sure people can see these games and see, let fans see their teams whenever they're playing. But also, like, I don't blame them for not treating these as like real games that should be public spectacles, because they're pretty bad looking.
Are there? So you said other clubs do this in terms of like go and like
Yeah,
go to more international
even if it's
stage?
not like their whole preseason, but I want to say like Seattle goes to Mexico pretty often. Like they go to real places and play real teams. They don't just do some like MLS jamboree, like you know.
Well, I think the Red Bulls used to have, maybe even very recently, had like multiple stages of preseason.
Right.
Like they would do like a Florida camp.
They do that
and then
still now. That's what they did this time.
And they would do like our version of a closed door like match would be like with Southern Florida University,
Right. Which teams have always done that. Like
Right.
they've always, but it is nice to end the preseason on a little bit more of like a dress
ramp up,
rehearsal. Yeah.
Which, and then, mind you, the results aren't flattering. So it's going to be hard to, for RBNY have not been flattering in these last few preseason games. So it's going to be a little hard to, be Pollyanna-ish about it. But it's also like, it's hard for me to treat these as real games, even by preseason game standards.
It's nice to have like that separation between like the college scrimmages that are truly just practice sessions, and then one or two like slightly more legit ones.
Right.
You have put the like image into my head of like RBNY trying to go to like a tour in Korea or Japan, like they're a Premier League team or Real Madrid or something.
Well, I mean, if we're part of like the Red Bull global network of like prestigious clubs or whatever, why aren't we doing that?
I mean,
why aren't they putting us on a platform like we're a big deal in other countries?
There are some pretty random like mid-table European teams that go to Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, Bolton did a tour in the U.S.
RBNY doesn't even make it onto like the stupid Red Bull magazine that I see on the shelves at Barnes and Noble. And it's like this property that doesn't exist.
Who buys that magazine? You
That's
think?
another good question, but yeah.
To the extent that anyone buys magazines,
It seems like it's about generally like sports culture, however much that
I like
means
to
anything.
imagine.
So why isn't RBNY like? Why aren't they putting like Forsberg or Lewis Morgan or something on the cover?
Right.
once in a
Remember
while?
when like you used to be able to go to any bodega in the city and you could see a Red Bull can with Rafa Marquez's face on it.
Oh yeah.
Or Thierry Henry's face on it. Now that was, I can't even sincerely, I don't even know how much I'm joking right now.
It was genuinely better than what we're working with now.
I can no longer make fun of like, Pablo and whoever for not having their irony straight, because I have no idea where my irony is here, actually.
I'm laughing kind of because there was that one year that they did do that.
Do what?
Put RBNY players on Red Bull
Oh
cans.
yeah,
There were like 5 years where they did it. That's the whole basis
I've
of the
got a
joke.
bunch of them on my fucking fireplace. Like
I remember trying to find Sean Davis inside 7-Eleven.
Oh no, but they first did this like around 2010 with like the new stadium.
I didn't remember
I feel
that.
like that is an instructive little point there, though, that it's like, back when Red Bull was just, an ownership group that was like kind of corny, but also kind of like distant from things, it worked on a certain like kind of spiritual and cultural level for the club. Nowadays, it's not only more integrated, it feels like the club is more integrated with Red Bull than it ever has been, but not in any like real fun or meaningful ways.
Right.
It's like, just getting Forsberg dished off to us for his divorce and stuff like that. I mean, it's not like
there was a sense of it was like
there's
corny.
not all the intangible stuff that you would think would come with being a Red Bull club in 2025.
Right.
Like,
It was not cool and it was a little awkward, but it still had the sense that they were like just generally throwing a lot of money at it. And we're like,
right.
yeah, whatever. Go get like the nicest photos you can and like just stop bothering me about it. Don't come up with anything creative or innovative. Just do it. And now it doesn't, it's still not cool, as I think we'll get into more, but it also feels chintzy a little bit on top of that.
And like, boilerplate, like,
Just before last note on the Coachella thing, it's also interesting because maybe this is another case where like the floor has risen for American soccer in a way that feels sort of unsatisfying, where like 10, 15 years ago, imagining like a U.S. soccer facility that just like all the teams could casually go to and do preseason, which was a lot harder to do. There was basically Bradenton, right? And then
Tucson.
And now it feels like it's much easier. Like there's just much more like pro quality soccer infrastructure in the country.
Right.
And now everyone maybe is a little bit more casual about it. And maybe that's not a huge deal, but I don't know. Maybe it's also just like there's so much more soccer these days that the incentive to go look up a stream of your team playing in February, January is less. That is some real sicko stuff.
Yeah.
As opposed to like watching a regular season game, which is
Yeah,
just
but like
normal.
Such a sicko.
But even when I was like a college student, like in lecture, kind of like putting on a stream quarter size, it was more because I was looking for my team's sake. I feel like my investment in like the team itself,
Your excitement to see the team for the first time since the winter and see the new
like
guys.
and like my
stuff.
connection to the team being rekindled for the season, and
Right.
like that kind of level of like.
I feel like that's a little more personal on our
It is
end,
personal
but-
too, but it's also like I think with
Yeah, I think
the
people still
league
feel that way.
expansion and just kind of like
Yeah.
how much is going on. Like we're saying, there's just oversaturation of
Right.
of everything. I think that our attention spans can't really handle that at a mass level either.
Right.
But
Well, on this note, the Red Bulls have announced a new kit. I think had teased it before the last episode, but I'm glad we didn't talk about it because they have now done the full kit and caboodle.
I cannot. It was inspired by Pete Davidson getting rid of all of his tattoos.
Did he really?
Did you not see that? Yeah, he's.
Did I not see that? Was like, no, I did. I didn't pick up a copy of Red Bull magazine at the.
It's on the cover.
Yeah.
It's been $400,000.
That's the kind of stuff that's on the cover of Red
Exactly.
Bull magazine instead of the New York Red Bulls.
I'm impressed. I mean, did he just like sit in a laser session for like 3
Yeah, it sounds like
weeks
something.
straight?
It sounds like
yeah.
something that's let's not talk about Pete Davidson. But I was about to say something really rude. But yes, the Red Bulls have released a new kit, Brett.
It is called the Stone Street kit. And okay, first I want to talk about the look of the kit just in isolation. And then we can talk about like the rollout and everything and what that means about kind of what we were talking about already about
Yeah.
just like the club. how it's run.
The kit is whatever.
The kit. Doesn't someone want to take a crack at describing the kit? I imagine most listeners have viewed it, but I think it's still worth to make an effort
to try and describe in
your mind's eye.
Yeah.
Remember those like the blot diet things for
Rorschach diagrams?
Yeah, like it kind of looks like that to me.
But describe the colors to me.
Muted.
But okay.
I know. Well, okay. I think it's gray.
Tan.
Is it tan? Okay.
tan.
Well, that's the thing though. It's like
Beige,
I
I would say.
beige-ish, neutral.
Yeah, sand colored, I would say.
It looks like Kuwait in 1991.
Right. Well, that's the thing. It's like I feel like they dropped the leak of the kit to make it look so horrifically desert camo-ish that
right.
by the time the actual release came out, people were like, "Oh, it's not as bad," you know. Like
It doesn't look as aggressively camo, so it is like a mostly yellow. It's got like kind of a distressed like pattern. It is a different type of pattern than the yellow kit
Or the glitch kit.
Which the yellow kit I almost like without thinking just called it the piss kit. You know, why resist it? The piss kit. I did have a brief moment of panic when I couldn't remember whether we were cycling out that kit or the red kit, and I thought maybe we had the piss kit and this new tan kit. And that would be a new club identity.
Yeah,
but
boy.
Jesus, I'm going to pull up a new photo of it. Because I was about to say, the first color I think of, not having it right in front of me, is yellow.
Yeah, kind of.
And but like a different color yellow than like the older, like reverse Arsenal
The Red Bull
scheme.
Sun yellow.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Which is a legitimate club color, or should be.
The MLS store refers to it as a tan color jersey.
Tan. Okay, looking back at the photos again.
But it could go either way.
It is tan. So, I in isolation, I don't necessarily hate it. I do say it has no relationship with any other part of like the club identity. The piss kit was, at least we had some history of yellow, I would say to me, it feels more like a third kit, than like a secondary or something that you could dabble with if you have a really strong ironed on or bolted on primary identity. To me, the red kits that we have currently don't really hit that mark. They're certainly closer than other things we've had in recent years, such as the glitch kit.
But trying to work black in too much, I don't see how that's going long term.
And it's just like we had for years. We did just do white, red, white.
It was clean. Some of those white kits I thought were a little plain at the time. But looking back, they look so nice.
They're real nice.
And now it's also
even the 06 kits where they were just ironed on from the Adidas shop.
I also thought at the time I thought the white top, red bottoms was a little too plain, like in those Henri years.
Right.
But man, the consistency was so nice.
Yeah, but now they've made it somehow more plain because the shorts are the same color as the top for this kit.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't just give me red shorts at least, and you can at least claim
mix and match around with
or
the
at
other
least
ones.
claim the identity, it could be oh, it's kind of like that white red scheme that we have going on, but it's just there's no desire to
2018
be,
was peak
the club. Yeah, I
for
think
that,
so, pretty much
with the mix and match.
Yeah, exactly.
The
we
reds
could have
and
just
the
kept
whites.
that.
Yeah, or a variation.
Who's saying no?
Right. I guess I am. I don't know. Sympathetic is a little too generous, but I understand the desire to work in a little bit more variety than just repeating the 2018 colors. But you need some sort of through line, and we haven't really had that. And I don't,
Does Brazil wear different colors?
Well, that is different because country is a little different. Than
but big club, any club too. Do Real Madrid wear different?
Right. Chelsea's always going to have a blue kit. Yeah. The away one can be a little bit different. The club may argue that's what they have right now, that they have a core red kit. Again, I think the core red kit is a little too unusual. But I hope at least we can get back on track to keeping a core identity. This means that next year when they replace the red kit, they have to keep a red kit. Like they absolutely cannot like get clever with like the black and piss kit or like anything like that. Like they've now cornered themselves into making sure that we have to have a red kit. So hope that's in the works, because I mean it seems like these things are planned very far in advance. And part of the reason I say that is that they've started describing this kit as the Stone Street kit.
Well, and I just, before we go into the meat of it all too, I do, and this is a little bit of why I was like hesitant to like say much about it like online or whatever, was that it's become a thing across MLS and all of soccer and like all of sports to some extent the last several years, to be like, oh, a team is releasing a new jersey and they have a bunch of like silly copywriting that they did about it to like, have for the launch and like all that kind of stuff. And like everybody's conditioned themselves to be like, oh, isn't that silly? Like, oh, they wrote some silly copy. That's just like kind of sports these days. But this was like the rollout of this kit was like a level beyond that.
Oh, it was even stranger.
I think we're about to delve into.
It was the fascinating thing about it was that it was strange in a way that doesn't even necessarily lend itself to being lampooned in that format. Because everything you're like, okay, but wait, what? And interesting that when I asked everyone to describe the kit, nobody said the word grid anywhere. Because they've called this the Stone Street kit and made a reference to Stone Street, one of the streets in Lower Manhattan, one of the oldest streets in the city. That is now, you may now know it because it's a little bit of like a historic square where like they had a bunch of
pedestrian only
bars and everything, lots of post-work happy hours for the finance district, I understand, go on there. But apparently it was like one of the first, I think it was the first paved streets in the whole city, in like the old city down at the tip of Manhattan, hence Stone Street. So, okay, a nod to history, local history. The club doesn't really do that enough. That's on paper, I'm like, okay with this. But then this seems to be the extent of the connection. I guess it seems like the argument is that it is colored like the pavers on, or like a stone street. I don't really think it is.
Certainly doesn't evoke that.
No, it looks more like desert camo-y.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
the grid.
They segue into this whole thing about the grid and saying that, oh, it's all about the grid. And if you look at the shirt, like one of the very subtle patterns is a grid at some point, but it's certainly not a defining pattern of the shirt. It might have like some small actual like ink on it that has a grid, but I'm almost tempted to say that it is like a thing that like shimmers, if the light hits it right. I don't know. I'll have to look at it again.
It's not a primary
It's very
feature.
subtle, which like...
And it's also not the Manhattan grid.
It's not the Manhattan grid. It's just like a random section that is like a little gritty on the...
It's squares, yeah.
Yeah, it's squares. And then they're like, oh, Stone Street, where the Manhattan grid, where like the famous grid of Manhattan started.
No.
Which isn't accurate, but like, look, I'm not saying it has to be accurate. Like in some ways as like an urban planner and designer, this uniquely is like my, an opportunity for me to be pedantic, but I'm not even like, I don't think it has to be, accurate per se, but I do think it has to be intuitive, where like even if you're telling something that's not factually accurate, it has to be accessible and make sense just to like a random person. And I don't understand the purported connection between Stone Street, which one kind of like other things with this club is maybe not as famous as they think it is.
Yeah.
I was like, oh right, yeah, Stone Street. I guess
all the famous New York places,
streets.
but all the famous places in New York: Statue of Liberty, Yankee Stadium, Stone Street.
Stone Street is sort of the ML Forsberg of New York City landmarks, is what I'm going for here. But doesn't make sense that it is like the origin of the grid. But then they seem to like abandon this idea in particular. And maybe to clarify, we can look at like the promo video that they put out there. And they're at this promo video, it like opens with a shot of like a security camera on a driveway somewhere, maybe on Stone Street. I don't know.
They don't really have loading docks on Stone Street.
No, they don't. And then like, I don't know if it's supposed to be, maybe it's Forsberg who's like pointing at the camera. I don't know. I don't really get it. And then it like quickly cuts to like panning across some old maps and like historic looking images. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, oh, a street, like a one road where like that started a revolution. Don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think to the extent that, like, yeah, I guess Stone Street was around during the American Revolution. To my knowledge, there isn't
battles there.
really anything going on. Like, Bowling Green had like a famous event there. Like, there was like one of the first protests or like things after the Declaration of Independence. People marched down to Bowling Green and knocked off the top of the fences that had King George III's sigil or whatever on it. And the fences are still there. And that's why there's a bunch of Bowling Greens across the country, because they named it after the Bowling Green in Manhattan. That's a famous, but still kind of under the radar, New York City history thing. Don't really understand the revolution thing.
Stone Street, where a revolution started.
But they also said like one road, and it's not a road. It's which again, you're calling it the Stone Street kit. I don't know. But it also makes me suspect that they're trying to go for like a Revolutionary Road thing, which is a book and a different thing. And they're like, oh, it connects it all. And it doesn't really connect at all. It's very much a small little street that is almost basically a public square. And then they segue to shots of like Midtown and like a very Empire State of Mind vibe of like the big city, like the Big Apple, where concrete dreams are made of. And I'm like, okay, I guess I sort of get this. If you're like, oh, Stone Street, concrete, and like the Mets had like that asphalt jersey from last year. Are you trying to rip that off? And then it just like completely goes to be like, oh, the grid is key to everything. And I'm like, the grid, I guess it's true that the grid connects the entire part, like all of the region together. But that's true in the same way that like your driveway is connected to the road network that goes all the way down to Panama. Like, if you're going for the motif of connecting things, like the bridges and the tunnels are really more what you're going for.
Like, I'm sorry, like
also thematically with this club. Though.
Yeah.
Well, and the Manhattan grid is like the most famous street grid on the planet, and also one of the very few that's probably casually identifiable to a random person. If you just showed him an outline of Manhattan Island and the way the streets are lined out with the rectangles and with Broadway carving through it and all that, and like a lot of people would recognize it. That is not what is on this shirt.
No, there is a version of a shirt out there where you could put like an actual grid and have like a sash across it that is Broadway.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm sure NYCFC has a version of this on in a folder somewhere.
NYCFC code.
Yeah. But it's very clearly, all of this is to say,
Also, that grid, not the same grid
What?
system as what the original Stone Street would have been.
Yeah, like Stone Street, like
Isn't
anyone
even
who has
part of
spent
that
5
grid.
Street, like if it were the Houston Street kit,
Yeah.
then you could be like, oh yeah, where the grid started. But no, no, like
All of this is pieced together with like chewing gum and Band-Aids.
And,
Like the logic of all this.
I don't want to just like cry wolf all the time, but it really does feel like AI logic a little bit of like stitching things together. Or it could be someone being like, okay, we've got this kit and we want a local angle. Like, I need you guys to think of something. And then like a team Googles and puts a couple things together and they're like, that's great. And they're like, oh, it doesn't really make sense. They're like, doesn't matter. It's just all going together. And because it looks like they had this kit and they're like, oh, we want to add a local angle to it. Let's try to find any local angle. And then maybe somebody Googled a list of landmarks and saw Stone Street and was like, okay, we can say it looks like a stone. And compared to the last kind of daring retcon that they attempted, which was the laser kit, which they then said was like the cables on the Brooklyn Bridge. This is a new level. Like the laser kit.
That made sense compared to this. That made total sense.
They also
compared
just
to
picked
this.
one thing. They're like, oh yeah, that's like the one visual motif that you can actually see.
They didn't build some like story around
Right.
it.
They weren't like, oh, it's about Stone Street, which maybe we're confusing for Bowling Green, and also is part of the grid that it isn't, and also the grid connects everything, and concrete jungle where your dreams are made of.
Well, Well, not to pile on even further, and this is maybe something aimed more at like MLS and Adidas in the league as much as anyone else, but it turns out we're not even the only grid kit coming out in the league this year.
Yeah.
Real Salt Lake put out a grid kit. The difference between their grid kit and our grid kit is their grid actually looks like the grid layout of Salt Lake City.
Of Salt Lake,
And which is, I guess to Mormons or whatever, is an iconic layout. But the shirt actually looks like the way the streets do. It's not just some like thing they made up after the fact. So that adds even more just, confusion.
I have some ad copy for them to make a traditional white red kit for us, or it's I'm gonna call it the Vernon, New Jersey kit. The white of the artificial snow made by the Mountain Creek Resort, and the red will be the blood of all slain at Action Park.
Oh God, that makes more sense than this.
Well, listen, you can have this idea for free.
It's a little too New Jersey centric for my taste, but
now that you're a Vernon regular,
now that I'm a Jersey,
we went skiing today.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's just the whole thing is off. And then they've been rolling it out with all these tweets, and like they have like a bunch of random like people wearing the kit, which is like normal. I mean they've been advertising it with like Julian Hall, which I'm sorry, frankly I still don't really recognize instantly as a Red Bulls player for all of the like 200 minutes he's played. Do you think he's played 500 minutes, 200 minutes?
Do you mean like you don't recognize him in an absolute sense? Like if you saw him on the street, you would not think he's a New York Red Bulls professional?
I mean, like when they post these photos, I only recognize him because they've done a half adequate job of like staging everyone around him, like where it's like, okay, obviously this is the center person.
Because I was going to say, he is the most Zoomer looking Red Bull.
Yeah, but everyone else in these photos are also just random Zoomers.
Okay, yeah.
So, I don't know.
I thought... Oh, okay. So they're doing individual photos of like random.
Are you not seeing
peripherals? I've been seeing them, but I'm like, I don't remember the Julian Hall specific ones because I have.
I think that's probably kind of the point.
And the point is that they are. I mean, I guess Forsberg has been in some of them, but the leading player in this rollout was Julian Hall, guy who, like Brit just said, has played like 200 minutes. I mean, like, what are we doing here? What are we supposed to think is important at this club?
Anyway, so they put together this photo of like all the people, and I'm like, okay, great. That's just like the random models that they got to do it, and it was all styled by AlphaTauri, who apparently makes one green jacket, and that's the entirety of the catalog because everyone's wearing this one goddamn green jacket
with the jersey underneath,
and it looks fine. But
they're also like, who are these people? Why am I supposed to know who they are?
But then they're doing like a whole spiel.
Why am I supposed to care that they care
like,
about the Red Bulls?
Okay, the first person. Then they like start making posts where like they're tagging the person in the post, and I guess one of them is like the stadium host.
Right, that's what I was gonna say.
Which I was like, okay, at least they have a connection to the club. But just to clarify, like, and we can itemize this later. Stadium host, still terrible idea. All right, I don't care for it. I don't care if it's objectively a good idea or not. I just don't care for it. And then they go through and they make these posts where like they like mention these random people by name. And my favorite one, I think, is "Ball don't lie. Neither does Alejandro's footy influence." 6 of 11, styled by AlphaTauri, and they're numbering all of these tweets like blank of 11.
Like it's this story that everybody's waiting for. The next edition.
Who the fuck is Alejandro?
Yeah.
And what does it mean that neither does his footy influence doesn't lie?
He doesn't. His footy influence doesn't lie like a ball. Doesn't.
Yeah, but what?
You don't get that?
And. Why am I to care? Is that like genuinely? Is that like a sentence construction these days?
That does sound like. Oh, how do we tell people that this guy is an influencer?
Is he even an influencer?
That's what it sounds like they're trying to say.
Because okay, to be clear, I obviously understand "ball don't lie." Mm-hmm. That's a very old expression at this point.
Not even to this sport.
His footy influence doesn't lie about what? Like
about
what?
Him being influential.
This guy I haven't heard of ever. His footy influence does not lie.
Then there was another one where it's like saying on the mic and the track, Will's always going to bring the heat. Apparently this guy is like an Olympic athlete. But then in the club Discord, I guess like the club staff didn't even realize he was an Olympic athlete, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he's some musician." But like again, not a player.
Do they mean track as in like running track?
Yeah,
And
apparently.
does he also do music though?
They called him a musician for that?
yeah.
Oh my god.
But again, this is all. I don't want to get lost in the details.
Right.
That it's all just very. I'm very confused at what is going on and like what the pitch is.
So I had thought, right, because I hadn't looked into it, right, because I didn't think there would be any need to. I had thought they were just listing people associated with the club because they had listed the stadium host. I didn't realize these were just people.
One of these people appears to just be a random club employee, which is okay. To be clear,
What is the theme of all
It
this?
is
Like,
that is unsurprising that they just got. I think it's actually kind of cool that they just got random employees to be in the photos.
Right,
That's
right,
fine.
right, that's good.
But then like making posts as though we're supposed to recognize who they are is like totally baffling to me.
Hey, this is Sal from accounting.
No, that would be better. Sal from accounting would be
Right.
better. I get that.
His spreadsheets don't lie, just like the ball.
Again, that is actually better. Because I'm like, oh, I get it. Sal works for accounting. That's like the
that's an
MTA
actual intuitive joke and not
Right.
just complete random nonsense.
Or that's
being
like the
slapped
MTA
together.
things being like, oh, this is Rodney. He's been a trade conductor for 40 years. Everyone give it up to Rodney. I'm like, I understand that.
let's
Great.
go, Rodney.
They could have done that with this. I don't
Who
know.
is Alejandro?
Who is Alejandro? And like, why is this the
why is this what why is this what people want you to why is this what they want people to think about the New York Red Bulls?
So
It's just
okay, to also kind of I guess cut through this. The main ask here is just like, can we be thoughtful about something a little bit?
I am sensitive to how much we are annoyed by this, and like, you know, I guess people theoretically are still listening to this show, but I have to admit, I feel like it's the kind of thing where at this point, following the club and reading and observing its presence is kind of like watching a bad movie that I can't look away from. It's like watching Love Actually, where like I actually cannot look away from that movie because when you watch it, it brings so many questions. I'll be like, what was the original thought here? Like,
Yeah.
what was the idea? Like, who changed this at the last minute to be something else? And then I like go and I Google and I find out like, oh yeah, they did change the movie at the last minute because of 9/11. Like Rowan Atkinson was originally supposed to be like a chaotic angel figure. And I'm like, oh, okay, this complete jumble of mess that is objectively a bad thing. It was a puzzle for me to figure out. The New York Red Bulls are like that to me right now. Like,
that's a good way of putting it.
and it is I cannot look away, even though I
And like it explains some of the like the tenor of our show the last year or two,
Right.
And just what interests us about the club. So, and like Brit said, if you're still with us after all that, like God love you, like, you know, please stick around for the ride. We're gonna try and mix it up a bit more this season, but
gonna try
probably
to.
not much.
anyway.
Not based on these preseason highlights, which we'll get to.
I have to credit Haddad with this. Haddad said it first in the group chat. So like a good journalist, I have to say hat tip to Haddad. But we may be like the least cool club in the league right now, which to Cork's point earlier, we were always a little bit not cool, but now it has reached a different level, I think, where they're kind of trying again, and it's achieving this sort of mid-major college vibe that is really excruciating.
It was like, oh, we're not even back in, you know, the early days of RBA when it was just like bare concrete around the stadium. It was like, oh, we have like absentee sugar daddy ownership that isn't even trying. Cool. That like takes the responsibility off us and like, you know, allows us to build our own culture and make it whatever we want. Now they're directly involved and like trying to micromanage everything, and it feels like a fucking mess.
And now apparently they're hiring a hype team, you know, and back to the thing about the stadium announcer, just to clarify, we really got to like ditch the stadium announcer. I would be shocked if it helps like engagement or like response from the fans or anything. It's just not necessary in my opinion, and just really takes me out of the game. And the mascot, I will say that there is a universe where like there's a correct amount of irony calibrated for the mascot. I'm not one to ever dismiss Gunnersaurus. Gunnersaurus works. Gunnersaurus is a goof. He's ridiculous. It's like an oversized dinosaur who tries to play soccer, but he can't play soccer.
And why would there be a dinosaur involved with Arsenal?
Right.
Like,
And that's kind of the thing. It's like, well, that stuff not making sense. That's okay.
That's great. But
the whole point is it for it to not make sense.
But it's like also like it's also geared towards kids, but still funny to adults because you're like, it's a fucking big goofy dinosaur. Sure,
Right.
Love it.
But the giant literal bull doing skateboard tricks.
They're like trying to make him actually cool. Although maybe they were trying to go for like a hello fellow kids thing. The irony
just did not
What's
go
his
far
fucking
enough.
name?
Red.
I keep
With
wanting to
two
call it
Ds.
Bully.
He's not. He's not big. You know?
And he's also not even he's not even doing like a kind of like smirky grin like a lot of mascots do. He's doing like a straight, sorry if this term is offensive, soy face. Like he's just doing the like face, and it, like as if he actually sincerely thinks whatever's going on is cool.
It would be funnier if his
not like he's a knowing trickster like most mascots.
if the suit was like positioned in a way where it forced him to constantly be pointing at something behind him while making the face, that would be funny.
I also just like the design is not that endearing.
No.
For Red, I think he's just like a little too blocky. Doesn't
I don't know why
the Jose Iglesias haircut.
Yeah, I don't know why anyone these days tries to design a mascot that looks cool.
Right.
The first one I can think of is Philly. Like their snake guy is also trying to look cool. I'm like, what are you doing? Every famous mascot that everyone loves is a big goofball.
even in your city.
Yeah.
Notoriously.
Right. Everyone loves to laugh at like the weird Bouba shaped, not Kiki, Bouba shaped thing. Red is like neither Kiki nor Bouba. That's another thing. It's if you don't know what I mean, I'm talking to like the linguistics thing where they ask anyone from any language to look at two shapes and describe which one is Kiki and which one is Bouba. And Bouba, you might be thinking in your mind already, is the nice round one, and Kiki is nice and sharp. Gunnersaurus, obviously Bouba. Gritty, also Bouba because he's round. The Fanatic, Bouba. Orbit, Bouba. These are all Bouba. Kiki is not the right move for a mascot. Red is not even full Kiki. He's somewhere between Kiki and Bouba. It's a mess. It's a disaster. They should get rid of it. That's another mistake the club is making. They're moving the press box to the corner near the away section, which this is maybe a little bit more of a practical concern. I think is also a misstep. I will say I've always been surprised that they gave so much prime real estate to the press box, and I wouldn't have been surprised if they tried to like kick them up into a box like further up. But putting them in objectively the most desolate part of the stadium, and maybe even having the press like just mix with the general population in the concourse also looks like an insane move.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine it's going to get even any more press to show up compared to the people who've been there.
And like
already.
It's great for press from the opposing teams.
Yeah.
Maybe. But even then, like I remember like you in our group chats, Cork, when you were sitting in press box still, you would sometimes just have some insights about how staff or bench were reacting just because you were there. And like I couldn't even seen it from 202 where I have a direct sideline into those places, you know?
Like, why would you even go to a game at this point if you don't have any of the benefits that you
a little bit maybe the
afforded
point
before?
too, because all of the production's going offsite as well, right?
The
production?
Apple production.
Apple production.
I mean, was that ever on site?
Yeah, but
it
Apple
was.
was not broadcasting from the lower press box ever. But,
Right, yeah.
but I get what you're saying. But like, I think it's
I
more
see
to the
what you
point of the fact that like, the league is starting to just kind of dispense with the idea that they need to have independent press showing up to games at all.
But
Doesn't seem like they show up much when they try anyway.
right, and you know the I guess to this point as well of like asking like where does the money go? Like what is the point of being a multi-billion-dollar corporation? I also think the club should definitely just open up an office in the city and put their non-sporting, non-ops staff there to run things right now, because like the stuff that is getting produced right now out of RBA or maybe even East Hanover is not cutting it. It's people need to be
not cool.
People
for
need
lack
to
of a better
be
term.
exposed to our cosmopolitan wiles in the big city over here. I'll even admit it. Sometimes it's nice to walk around Manhattan, take the train in. Oh, I guess now you can park your big ass fucking car in the city all you want now. Again, but go and hang out a little bit, get a little bit of culture, even walk around Times Square like our dearly beloved Kaku. Because I was thinking as well to like when we started this show, the people running some like the club comms and like people who were interning it there were like people who were, I felt like, interested in working in soccer because they thought it was something neat. And Red Bulls were like the local place to do that and get a job and like put up with like taking a little bit of a reverse long commute to go work in soccer because it was an interesting thing. Now I think it's much easier to work in soccer or work in other sports. Soccer maybe isn't cool or like interesting in the same kind of way, but also you can like be the brand, the content manager for fucking Schalke USA or something, you know, and you don't have to be schlepping to New Jersey to go work in soccer anymore. So it's a little bit different. And like I can't imagine like when they're competing for people who want to work in soccer communications or soccer marketing, if you're competing with someone who can offer a job based in Manhattan or based remote, and you're saying, oh, do you want to come out to Harrison, New Jersey or East Hanover, New Jersey every day? Like, probably doesn't help you with talent recruitment. You know, like I can't imagine it does.
Well, I mean, I think another part of the reason why most of their staff is based out there as opposed to in the city is because they don't pay a whole lot to a lot of junior staff.
Well, you know, they should.
Everything I've gathered over the years.
For a well-financed, well-backed team, that also feels inexcusable.
Right.
But it's pretty it's getting to a bad spot right now where I can't really look away, as we have described, and I'm sort of fascinated by it in a way. But I think they really need to open up a different office and just get a fresh start here. But it's hard for me to imagine anything different until they sell.
I think maybe you need to take a different approach and just start liking all this stuff, and they're just going to reverse course and try to make...
Oh, that's interesting. What is even cool now, though? That's a good question.
I mean, that's a good question in general, yeah.
You know what's cool? The Coachella Invitational Tournament.
Yeah, so
I take back everything I said at the top of the episode. That is the coolest thing to talk about now.
What more could you want? Coachella and soccer.
And invitations.
that is also where like the fictional music festival and On Cinema at the Cinema happened, or is it like a different valley?
Oh, I think it was like the Sun Valley Music Festival.
Yeah, Coachella's where they have the real one.
But Pat Benjamin was there on the ground in California,
again,
giving us the
not
scoop
us.
on these games. And these games generally did not go the Red Bulls' direction as we get ready for it's not the home opener, but the season opener in Cincinnati on Saturday. Coming off the most recent result being a 6-0 loss to the brand new San Diego SC. I think they're
Great
FC.
question.
FC, I think.
But to add to the sense that, nothing is really popping in MLS these days. I don't really know much about this new expansion club except that they beat the Red Bulls 6-0 in this last preseason game. I was lucky enough to watch a good bit of this game, and I can't say the score line. I mean, maybe the score line was a bit, the full 6 being hung on was more of a result of, a team just giving up in a scrimmage game, which is understandable. But the actual early goals that I caught in the early part of the game when there was still a little bit at stake, boy, this does not look like a team that's set to contend going into 2025 in what has been a somewhat more strengthened Eastern Conference. It looks like a team kind of like we left off at the end of last episode where, I mean, it's a team that both in reality and in theory, watching them, are a team that sold half its squad over the offseason for somewhat arbitrary reasons and then replaced it with a bunch of unknowns who are still going to need a significant amount of time to gel, it seems, especially the back line.
Yeah, so when I'm playing around the golf, for example, right?
Okay.
And I'm hitting the range and I'm hitting some bad shots, usually get pretty good feeling about how my round's going to go because I feel like I'm getting my bad shots out of the way. Watching now this like kind of full game playing and the highlights from the San Diego game, I do not kind of feel like that about this. It does not feel like we're getting our bad shots out of the way. It feels like we're kind of training
every time.
Set up poorly.
Like what Peaches was trying to explain, we were watching some highlights, some quick blow-by-blow highlights of the preseason games before we recorded just now, and we are currently playing on the TV the full match from the RSL preseason game. And like Peaches said, we're just kind of like, keeping our eye on it while we talk, but also watching it, man, just like in the San Diego game that I saw, a lot of track meets, a lot of balls just being kicked upfield and our numbers being completely compressed somewhere else, which just seems like the most global bad sign of how this team is set up and how this team is gelling going into 2025. It looks like on the defensive end, because they are obviously leaking so many goals, it seems like a more kind of intuitive situation where, it's a new group of defenders because you decided to sell Andres Reyes for couch change and then replace him with, a few guys in their 30s who are not super spry even when the team is set up well, but when the team is getting dragged upfield like they are in these games, the pressing looks very chaotic as well. When the team's getting dragged up in these games, there's just no recourse when the other team just spills a ball over and breaks the lines. This guy Hawk is slow. Tim Parker is
also slow.
Tim Parker gave up a penalty in this game and is just kind of clumsy and slow when things break down like that. I mean, if Isla and the Nealis brothers are your quickest guys on the back line, that's a little bit of a problem, especially for a team that plays the space like we do. And then on the front end, what I was seeing in the San Diego game, and this is something that I don't think is going to work that well, even when it's given time to gel, is it seems to be a setup. So the team has been set up in kind of like almost like a 3-6-1, honestly. Maybe you can call it a like 3-4-3 or a 5-3 or a 5-2-3. But the front end, the way it's set up is that Choupo-Moting, as kind of like a more technical target striker who plays with his back to goal, he's playing up top as the only center forward and is kind of linking play underneath to spring Morgan and Forsberg running on the sides of him. Morgan has a bit of pace, obviously, and can, have some breakout moments, but Forsberg going into, he's 33 years old. I really don't see how he's going to have the engine for the team to be playing like that and to be breaking back lines playing like that. It's really hard to see how that's a long-term result, even if Forsberg and Choupo-Moting stay on the field all season, which is a huge question mark. I mean, it's kind of like a thing, to give an analogy for people, it's kind of like Choupo-Moting is maybe playing kind of like the Harry Kane, or if you're a little bit older, Dimitar Berbatov role, where he's the tall striker who is coming deep to kind of trap the ball and control it and lay it off for other guys. That only works if you have just extremely fast elite wingers on each side of, Harry Kane or Dimitar Berbatov. When it's, Forsberg and Morgan, going into the twilight of their careers, maybe it sparks up a little bit in second halves when it's presumably like Serge Ngoma or Yengar or one of these guys burning off on the edges. But if that's like the attacking plan going into 2025, I just don't see it, causing much threat for many teams around the league.
It's also not what Forsberg's strengths were when he was on the field last year. Objectively, the team did do better with him on the field than last year. Biggest, most obvious takeaway from last season. But Forsberg was effective in that weird way of drawing more players into the game by being that driving presence in the middle rather than being a end product or, directly facilitating things. He had a certain gravity on the field and was able to, just facilitate the Red Bulls play in a way that was sort of kind of hard to pin down. I mean, Doyle's column before MLS Cup, I think, identified this actually pretty well, where like it didn't lead to a lot of countable goals and countable stats, per se, but there was clearly a difference. Having him out on the wing seems to neutralize that, and maybe it's an experiment or something. I don't know, but it does not seem like an intuitive concept to pursue. And,
It seems like it would probably work better in half court. Yeah, when teams are tough to break down, when teams aren't, coming out of their own half against us because they're afraid, which has been a common problem for this team, over the years. But that's just another example of kind of just making the whole plane out of the black box when you're making your whole attack a reaction to a worst case scenario. You're not really, setting up your team properly.
It's possible they were just drilling that, but then you have to ask, like, what use is drilling that if you're not in that situation?
And also, even you can very clearly see from these like shoddy preseason games too that there's a very clear vulnerability in how we send those numbers forward. They're just breaking through.
Yeah, that's to add to my point about half court and how it might be a better setup when the numbers gather up in the final third. That'll just leave teams even more free to run on like Hawk and Parker and this back line that is not only jumbled and still trying to figure each other out after being spliced and diced after last season, but also is somewhat old and slow now. So
we lost our best center back.
And now we have Raheem Edwards at left back. Is Raheem Edwards going to be the starter? It looks like
it's kind of. Otherwise it's Omar Valencia, because Chilean guy has apparently not had his paperwork taken care of despite being sought after for like 6 months. And then, they've had Valencia at left back, who's an RB2 guy, fringe Panama international coming up. But guy who has not been trusted with MLS minutes in the past, who is now all of a sudden front of the line potentially, which speaks to just the general just poor squad building that's been going on for a while now. To kind of speak to, maybe this helps us segue a little bit more into expectations for the season and kind of putting things big picture. But this is going to be Jochen Schneider's 4th season at the helm. There's a lot of this discourse all the time that always acts like he just showed up and like, oh, Jochen's finally going to fix the team. He's been here 4 years.
It's crazy.
The only reason we can assume the team looks like it does right now is because this is Jochen Schneider's best work. If the team doesn't have a good season this year, I don't understand why this management regime should remain incumbent.
Yeah, and also like what we talked about earlier, the episode to Schwartz not being able to answer the question of like what makes a successful season.
Right, we can introduce that now. Yeah,
that's on him. That's his
job.
It's his job to set the expectation for what the season should be. Like if your manager doesn't know what a successful season is, that's
what
your job as a sporting director to set those expectations.
So recount to me this question and answer.
Oh, well, to not misquote him, or at least not misquote the Google Translate of his German. Jochen Schneider he did an interview with Kicker, the famous German soccer magazine, which, pretty much a theme with recent Red Bull coaches, because they do their actual in-depth interviews with foreign language publications. They don't really say a whole lot to the American public. But in the meantime, Sandro Schwartz did an interview with Kicker where a lot of it was pretty, boilerplate and just asking him about, what's it like in MLS and all that kind of stuff.
This is Schwartz, to be clear, not Schneider.
Schwartz, yeah, okay. This is Sandro Schwartz. And like I said, it was a lot of boilerplate, just foreign view of MLS stuff. But when they actually got into some of the nitty gritty about asking him about the Red Bulls, they asked him at one point, will your team go into the new season as one of the title contenders after the 2024 final? Snyder's first line, I don't know. But as we have the claim to be as successful as possible without talking about wanting to win the title every day, if you had such an experience as the 2024 final, then it is logical for you to long for it again. But it doesn't make sense to talk about where we want to go every day, but to think about where we need to be to get to a final. We are working on that. Which, again, just to my point I made a second ago, this is Schwartz's 2nd season. This is Schneider's 4th season. How much more waiting do we have to do before this is anything close to a final product? And it also feels like a concession that, like, no, last year was not a success just because they made it to a final.
Right.
The team is not really riding any momentum because they won a few games in November. And then another weird answer he gave, and this is maybe, the more kind of loaded one.
Yeah, I think so.
Is he was asked, what would a successful season in 2025 be for you? And Schwartz responds, a good season is if you see us playing without a jersey and still immediately recognize that this is a Red Bull team. If we act like this, it will also be reflected in the results. Which I know he's not talking to the fan base here, which, he almost never is. No Red Bull coaches these days. But that's like the corniest, most cliched basic line you could possibly spit out as a Red Bull soccer coach.
I'm also still surprised by it. Well, maybe that's the wrong way to put that. But like, after all this time, you're still talking about like looking like a Red Bull team. Like that does not... Like, why? Why do you care about that? Like, during the Rangnick era, I think there was a little bit more of a coherent concept of like, oh, their Red Bull has a system. But like, the Emperor has no clothes at this point. I don't expect Schwartz to cop to that. But it feels like that whole concept of Red Bull Global Soccer being a unified project is not even really a Red Bull priority anymore. Like Klopp is just some guy. Gomez is just, like they're not within the Red Bull family. Like the Schwartz also is not, it came in from outside, despite having some connections. Schneider, for that matter, like Schalke guy, like this whole idea that there's like their particular Red Bull brand feels less relevant to me, particularly since there's lots of clubs that play like the stereotypical Red Bull style anymore. It's not 2017 anymore. It's not 2015 anymore.
It's not distinctive. Yeah.
I think you said something interesting about the audience, of who he's speaking to, right? Because in the interview like that, if you're talking to that, you're kind of talking to your boss, right? And so I'm thinking that the expectations are somehow still like set from up top about, oh, this should be like your main goal is to be a Red Bull like
maybe
coach or something.
Inertia,
but that's
though,
like
too, because like who is
like what is that? So still like how are you being judged?
Is dead. Like Mintzlaff apparently is distracted with like F1 stuff. And isn't involved in soccer. Like maybe they're just sort of reciting the standard line without any other clue of what to say.
Right.
I mean, it reminds me also.
Which again is like,
literally again in the fourth season of a front office, second year of a coach, just saying like, oh, I don't really know what the expectations are. We don't really talk about that stuff. Not acceptable.
I guess the other thing to me is that from like 2015 to 2020-ish, even in like to the beginning of the Struber era, like the first full Struber season, I had patience for the idea that like a fully fleshed Red Bull vision would be a winning team in MLS, just like to the extent that most other MLS teams don't have like a full concept or full system installed.
They're just kind of making it up as they go along.
Yeah, if you could like install like a full sort of tactical system, in 2018, we felt like we were seeing that. I was like, okay, I buy this theory of change. I buy this concept. Now, to me, that no longer seems obvious. Like you have to prove it. Like I think if Schwartz like goes out there and successfully implements a full Red Bull soccer team and it looks like they're playing Red Bull soccer, that doesn't. I'm unconvinced that means that they will win games.
Yeah,
if they need to prove that.
If anything,
and how are they not? How is there a question of them playing Red Bull soccer again? Not to repeat myself, but like the team has never been more. The club here in New York has never been more integrated with Red Bull over the last 4 or 5 years, certainly since Schneider took over and rolled out the red carpet even further for Struber. How is there even any question of that this doesn't look like a Red Bull team? Like I said a minute ago with Schneider, the only reason we can assume that the team looks however it looks is because this is how Red Bull wants it to look.
And I think for proof of concept, we did get a proof of concept that like statistically, if you do the Red Bull stuff, it doesn't work. Like, right? That's kind of
get you close, but you have to like have a well-constructed roster and a good manager.
Well, yeah,
too, you didn't have to do all the other stuff
Right.
you still need to do.
Well, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying though too. Is like we had that when Struber was here, like being the Red Bull team at like almost peak levels of Red
Right.
Bull in terms of like getting all of the statistics that they're looking for, in terms of all the
Yeah.
team like growth that they're looking
Although
for.
I maintain under the Struber years, the strangest thing to me is that it didn't even feel it. Watching it visually did not feel like eye pressing.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
the stats said it, and the games were miserable to watch. But it didn't even feel like the distinctive style that you were supposed to expect.
They were
Of course, to your point too, though, I think you raised another part I hadn't thought about, which was everyone keeps on talking as though like there's some sort of external factor from keeping them from doing the Red Bull Vision, and it's like, what is it? Like, you guys run the whole thing. Like, you
Rand Felwell out of town.
yeah, like there's no one getting in your way from doing the Red Bull Vision. Like at this point,
Not even the money aspect of it.
yeah,
really.
like what do you mean? Like, we just got to get it right eventually. Like, I don't know. It's not inspiring to say the least, even if it is just
Yeah,
sort
that's
of
that's the nicest way to put it. It's just like, is this supposed to be inspiring? Like, I don't get it.
And it
Like,
does remind me of like there was a Jonathan Wilson column this week that Profe shared that caught my eye because he was sort of declaring, you know, the peak saturation of like tiki taka build out the back. That, you know, if you go to a non-league Sunday league in Northumbria, the random pub team will be playing tiki taka out the back. And now like it's time for like, we're in that weird interstitial period where clubs have not figured out how to totally counter that yet, but you can tell it's coming. There needs to be a paradigm shift. And I was thinking about that in terms of MLS because it was interesting because MLS over the last 10 years, of course, had this period of immense technical growth. In 2015, when Jesse started his like first, you know, more rudimentary pressing system, it generally was...
it took the league by storm.
It took the league by storm because players were not quite at that technical level yet. That Red Bulls team was still playing Chris Duval, like fresh out of NCAA soccer, starting at a position, and every team had a player like that. And the technical education and training wasn't where it is now. And I think you see that in the league where like the technical level is clearly higher than it was 10 years ago. At the same time, though, I do feel like in some ways MLS sort of skipped a step where the paradigm kind of shifted to the counter already, where everyone is ran the full press system before proper build out the back really took hold in MLS. Like,
yeah, there wasn't anything to press against
Right.
in a lot of cases.
NYCFC
which is kind of
tried it.
which is a tactical conundrum that the Red Bulls have run into trouble
Yes.
with a lot over the years. That a lot of these other teams don't play in a way that is susceptible to being beaten by the press.
right. And
just-
City was the one team that consistently did it, and we
Yeah.
beat up on them.
Right.
And then Columbus was sort of the team that was the closest to being like a fully fleshed antithesis to the Red Bulls. And, you know, I guess you could point to the league as really following a little bit more of that model. This is all to say, I think we're in a similar spot that Wilson suggests, but just like maybe a twisted version of it, where our sort of dominant hegemonic system was actually the press and MLS, and now everyone's doing it, and it's not clear, or it's not easy to implement a coherent, easy to drill counter to it. And we're getting a weird amount of sloppy but still kind of technical games that aren't really engaging to watch.
It's not the proper progress of history. This is the Khmer Rouge starting year zero of MLS tactics.
There might be something hopeful about all of this. I think I saw this might have been a Tifo video or something like that. One of those kind of like videos talking about, you know, the rise and fall of modern football tactics and how there's this one underlying factor in this rise of the magical player again, kind of. I think this is sparked a little by like the Cole Palmer types, where there's kind of these players who are just doing stuff again, and that's the key to unlocking against these, you know, both build out the back high pressure.
Just
system teams.
doing things that are outside of the expectations that people have set in.
Well,
with
just
attack
having
like we've gotten the teams have gotten so used to robot players that a player
having
doing
creativity
something
is now
Right.
valuable again.
is an inefficiency.
So that
being
might be.
exploited.
This is the point we're at, maybe, and we don't like. To some extent, Emil Forsberg has a little bit of that X factor, but he's not like the hero. Maybe Lewis Morgan is kind of more stereotypically like the hero that we might need to be a successful thing. But yeah, I think it's going to be about like I kind of buy into that. Like we it's going to be about recruiting kind of like that magical player who can really just bring you over. For
We
some
had
teams
that
now.
magical player. His name was Alejandro Romero Gamara.
It's interesting. The other player I sort of think of is Kai Havertz as like a machine slop version of that, where like he maybe is like the next evolution of like the Thomas Mueller player, where like he doesn't have a proper position and it's not obvious what he does well, but
He just
managers
helps.
love him and he seems to help teams win.
Yeah.
Forsberg is kind of like that for the Red Bulls. But I think it is different than what you're talking about with like the Cole Palmer lack of predictability thing. Suffice to say, I think the Red Bulls need another factor if they're going to consistently win games this year.
They need a tall, creative player, is what I'm saying.
Well, they have that in Choupo-Moting. He's pretty much the only thing, though.
I haven't seen this creativity yet.
We should
so-
shift to talking about expectations for the season this year. Because, I think the last two episodes we've covered the general changes, but like a quick recap is, backline overhaul. Reyes is out. We have Isla coming back. Tim Parker making his return, which I think is going to really give me weird deja vu all year.
I think if Tim Parker is playing a lot of games this year, then the season is not going our way.
Yeah.
Or this is not whatever Schwartz's idea of a successful season looks like.
Yeah. And of course, Tolkien left, and we've kind of replaced him with a platoon of options, which I will say actually in a vacuum, like I
Looks
don't
like
think,
the most potential for maybe improvement.
yeah, or just like even, like I don't think that's a calamitous loss
Right.
per se. But then, the up top, we have gotten rid of Manuel, of course, who now is not reporting to RSL. I guess it's unclear exactly the chain of events there, but just doesn't want to play for them, and they're trying to seek a transfer for him overseas, which I say, fair enough, Elias Manuel. Go with salad.
Yeah.
And we've, of course, acquired Victor Bogash and Choupo-Moting. Unclear to me, in my opinion, like who to really expect to be the main contributor here. I mean, it seems like the club is trying to build up expectations that Choupo is, but I'll believe it when I see it, just to be generous. 35-year-old player who didn't really play the last, 9 months at all. Even being generous to him, he's going to need warm-up period. Was there another striker that I'm forgetting other than Bogash? I don't know.
On the team?
No, I mean, new addition.
Well, I think also mentioning Von Zier's departure.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're doing that as a bit or not.
I wasn't, but yeah.
But you're glad you did.
Yeah. Morgan, Morgan, sincerely a bit of an interesting question mark, because despite the, cup run last year, Morgan was kind of not really up to form in the cup run. He did have a very productive beginning of the season. Am I getting my seasons confused? Was he hurt at the beginning of the season? I don't know. He's been a star player for us, but last year he did struggle, I think, to come back from injury and be an impact player down the stretch. If that continues this year, I think that's a big alarm bell. They kind of need Morgan to come back and be a little bit of a star.
And then this is another, piggyback onto the general assessment of the preseason games, but which to be fair, I think the problem in the preseason was squad wide and just, the team, the entire 11 just not really gelling and not really spacing together correctly. But I think looking at individuals in the midfield, it's pretty clear. I mean, we'll see how healthy Carvalho gets or if he gets, recalled back from his loan. But in the meantime, the incumbent central midfield is Daniel Edelman and Peter Stroud, which I don't know. This is probably rude to say, but for people who get the reference, that comes off to me as a very lads, it's Tottenham midfield. That's a if I'm an opposing team and I'm looking at the other team's sheet and saying who's stopping me in midfield today, Daniel Edelman and Peter Stroud, I'm feeling a little confident about my chances.
Where did this come from with Stroud? Because he was a periphery guy on the squad, getting just fringe minutes, and then he has this massive injury and he's out for a long period of time, and then when he comes back, he's just a de facto starting guy.
And it's a smaller version, not to get too bogged down in this, of the Tolkien thing that we talked about last episode, where it's there's such a just starvation of any actual good stories happening at the club and good things happening with players that Peter Stroud just not fucking up and just being a passable professional midfielder is considered oh yeah, Peter Stroud, he's a baller. Oh yeah, we're set with Peter Stroud. Whereas when you actually think about it for a few seconds, it's okay, yeah, an ML and a team that's actually contending for trophies would not have Peter Stroud.
Peter Stroud should be the third or fourth best central midfielder on the team.
Fourth. Should probably be fourth.
But I also I think part of what's disappointing to me, as you know who I am, I just did not,
do I?
You do. Is that I've been missing some Doncor minutes in preseason.
Yeah,
You'd figure a guy like him could get bled out a little bit, but it's just to offer.
He's who Doyle was really hyping up in his little RB column.
I can't believe it, but I think Doyle's right.
Yeah,
when he's given the time to watch the games, he writes about them well. He just doesn't have time to watch all 80 games.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Donker would be a luxury player, though. I mean, that's a player that you have in midfield if you're actually controlling games, and I don't see that.
But that to me is at least kind of a good story, right? We found this kid who was way better than we expected, maybe. But
I mean, when going a little bit back to Stroud, but just the midfield core, last year when we still had Frankie on the team, Stroud was the adequate level of depth on this team, I think. And now we just never really replaced Frankie. And look, even if you love Felipe Carballo and think he is the answer, they need to make up their mind about that soon, actually, because his loan expires in the summer. But most importantly, the thing that we've forgotten, I can't believe we've all forgotten this, is that this is Wiki Carmona's year, for sure. Will he have a position?
The key to all of this. You can't judge a New York Red Bulls team until Wiki Carmona has shown what he can do.
I wish Wiki weren't Venezuelan, because it sounds more problematic for me to say he's the new Cáceres. It's not just that they're both Venezuelan, but it's just one day it's going to be 2029, and we're going to be oh God, Wiki Carmona's been here for 10 years, and he's has the most experience, number of appearances on the club.
While never starting more than 15 games a season.
Getting 23 minutes a game, but then also somehow being the most important player according to the manager every game. And just head down, tunneling through everyone. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine this team putting up a sustained challenge. I think that's really my key disappointment, is that last year was a great example of something we've complained about for a couple years, that just the growing gap in how important mounting a regular season campaign is versus just having a cup run or two. And our preference on the show over the years is that it is preferable as a fan of a club to watch a team put together a coherent, strong campaign.
Week in, week out.
And this team that they've assembled now, maybe they do go on a cup run. Last year showed that can be done if they get it all to click right. But this does not seem to be a team that is poised or expecting even to make a top 3 place run in the league, which is, I think, the thing that fans get most excited about, even if they say it's really the tournament.
It's all about getting the cup.
Yeah, it's really just wanting to be able to show up to your stadium and expect a good game on any given week of the season. And I don't see that
from this team.
Unfortunately, I think everything for me points to a bit of a mid-table finish. I don't see any reason for them to miss playoffs, given especially how hard it is to miss playoffs this year. I don't think they will bottom out, but I think this looks like a very run-of-the-mill team that I kind of expect Schwartz to figure out the high line issue. I don't think they're going to get 6 dropped on them all the time. But I think they will struggle to score for sure. And we'll see a lot of draws like last year.
The year before that.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but I also get the feeling just deep in my stomach that I'm wrong by thinking this, and that somehow like this feeling either means that we're going to be first in the East or not make playoffs. Just kind of how poorly we're doing in this preseason.
How bad? You have to be so bad to miss the playoffs, though.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like it's either going to be like total.
How far off were we last season?
We won like 2 games in 4 months last season and still made playoffs.
Well, I'm just saying, like the vibes are either going to be like unexpectedly good or awful.
We were 7 points clear of the bottom line last year.
It's impossible to miss playoffs nonetheless.
Yeah.
Somehow 4 teams end up doing it, right? So
Six
teams don't make
year.
it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, I think this one thing that'll be interesting for this year is I don't think any signs are pointing to us having a good start out of the gate, right?
Tough opponents.
So we're going to have a few tough matches. Even our first match against Cincinnati is going to be a really difficult match. We're not showing any signs that we're playing very well in preseason. Even when we had, like, who cares about results, right? Like, you could still see signs of like what was being put together, but like there's none of that like here. So I feel like the last few years have actually performed really well in the beginning. Yeah. And then we've kind of entered this like summer slump or like whatever we've called it in the past, and like how we've like tried to like navigate that. But I think what we're going to see this year is a pretty slow start. And then, what does that leave us for the summer? When we actually do have injuries or players do leave and we're in a very bad starting position. I mean, that I think kind of speaks to this like very mid expectation for the year as well.
I'm sorry. We have a player named Jarvis.
Do we?
Whoever number 88 is.
Not Jarvis. I think that's a good call. I think that's a smart that like the last season that we started. Slow was the like COVID, the post-COVID season where it was still kind of COVID-y and like kind of wrecked. But it did give like a little bit of structure or narrative to the season to like crawl out of that hole. It might be interesting to see if the team is able to cling on to that, if that happens this year, as opposed to last year starting strong and then just kind of hanging out for 4 months.
Yeah, definitely. But Cincinnati on Saturday.
What's your prognosis?
I think I was actually writing up my general league predictions, just league table that I do at the beginning of every year the other night. And I think I had RB&Y at about 5th, which I think is where I had them about last year. And it, ended up being not far from that. I think I don't really have too much to say that's different from how you guys were just sussing it out. That just, I don't see anything about this team that's a whole lot different from how the team was structured the last couple seasons that resulted in, pretty drab mid-table finishes. Forsberg is a year older. Choupo-Moting, huge question mark. The back line is going to need months probably to be re-engineered. I just don't see what about this team really gives them an edge over a lot of different other kinds of teams in the Eastern Conference. I mean, I think Eastern Conference might be pretty tough this year, especially after Cincinnati was able to handle the Acosta situation, because then replace him with Evander, because Cincinnati's going to be strong again. You would have to imagine Columbus is going to be strong again. I think Berhalter is going to whip Chicago into shape real fast, and has already made some big signings. Philadelphia is going to be recharged under a new manager. I mean, there's just a lot of, as always with the Red Bulls, like they're not the only other team that's trying to improve themselves and compete this season. And I think there's just not enough with this current Red Bulls team that's going to really set them apart from the pack, let alone potentially keep them from dropping into mid-table.
When I heard you say that, it made me realize I think my like inclination of not expecting this team maybe to have a poor.
Oh, we went the whole episode without mentioning Messi too.
Oh, that's true.
As one of the contending teams.
Until now, but I think one of the things is that I've learned is that maybe this team doesn't have it. Nothing good about this team, nothing worthwhile about this team. What I've learned across the years, the league always disappoints me.
Oh yeah, that's always a factor.
It's always about who shows up. Shows up to RBA.
It's always nice to remind yourself that we're playing in MLS.
That we play in MLS, and that we're not like these guys. Sometimes just don't show up to RBA.
That's the other end of my little mantra about like the other teams are trying too, but the other teams that are trying are still MLS teams.
So that's kind of why I feel like, maybe we might do.
Buck Showalter would never make it as an MLS manager because, frankly, sometimes the game does not answer your questions. It creates more.